Moriden Athluan.
Working from within, Moriden Stormcrown created distrust, hatred, and discord within the ranks of the mighty vampire army raised by the ancient bloodline of Clan Volkar.
Cursing the name of he who defeated them, these vampire hordes were driven back to the plains of oblivion.
And so we find ourselves thrown together once again, my friend. Almost as if one of us were looking for the other. But why would either of us do that?
To self-improvement and the training of long-ignored talents and abilities.
Even as he trained at the illustrious and fabled Mages College of Winterhold, Moriden still continued to search for a solution to the continuing dragon attacks.
Spending his time, now, searching for answers among the countless tomes of the Arcanum Library, it would not be long before he was again called on to save all of Skyrim. Nay, all of
Is
the
that where we left
the
off?
grasping hands of power-mad maidens.
Once again, the bards only tell you what they believe to be truth. They weren't there. They don't understand. You, though. You, of all people, need to understand. So let me tell you what the bards will not, what they cannot. Because the truth is not what the bards would have you believe. "11 Evening Star, 4th Era, 201. I left the college before any else were awake, and summoned Arvak to carry me across the glacial fields and the northern shores towards Dawnstar. I wasn't sure what exactly I was going to be looking for when I got there. I knew that there was a daedric prince whose attention was on the city, or, at least, on me. Why, though? I couldn't be certain. So far, the princes had been using me far more as an errand boy than anything else. And though the princes may be looked on as evil, it must be said that they do have a tendency to reward their errand boys well. Certainly there are worse ways to make one's way through the world, though I fail to think of any offhand. With no real ideas of what to do or where to look, with the added incentive of a snowstorm having blown in off the Sea of Ghosts to make things a fair bit more cold, I took to the inn at Dawnstar. And it did not take me long to realize this was exactly where I was supposed to be, or, at the least, where a daedric prince wanted me to be. The discussion as I came in was all about dreams. Given that my own prompting to come here had also happened in a dream, I sat to one side and listened carefully. The locals, it seems, have been getting a fair number of them lately. Well, nightmares, really, but since nightmares are also dreams, the word still applies. The local priest, one of Mara, no less, is trying to keep them calm and tell them that it will all be dealt with soon. I watched him carefully. And if he started life as a priest of Mara, then I started life as a rich merchant. I can't say what it is about him, but his words and assurances don't mesh well with what I know of Marin beliefs or attitudes. That made him the obvious person to talk about this situation. With the locals far enough away that they couldn't hear our discussion, much of what I suspected came out. I didn't even have to bring up daedric influence. Arender brought it up immediately. The prince in question is Vermina, as I had suspected. Dreams have always been a part of her domain, touching as they do on memory, which is what she really cares about. She takes memories and nightmares are left behind. As Arender put it, like a cough is part of a larger sickness. What is more interesting, however, are two other things he said. First, that he knew the source of the infection. A tower, he says, is nearby. I don't recall seeing a tower while riding in on any of my visits to this city, but I'm not going to bring that up just yet. The second was that he mentioned returning to this tower, and the strong implication that he has been there before. I've agreed to go with him. Vermina clearly wants me here, though to what end I can't say yet. And this priest of Mara seems to be the key. How do you hide a tower that big on a cliff overlooking a city and never see it? It seems impossible. At the very least, highly improbable, and yet, there it is. The locals apparently know of it, the Tower of Dawn they call it, and it's always just been there, in plain sight, but ignored. In previous decades, it was home to a small order of priests who kept largely to themselves. Then came Vermina's worshippers, who established Nightcaller Temple within the Tower of Dawn. Again, Arender's knowledge of the place seems like more than what might be expected of a local, especially as it applies to the daedric worship side of things. I shook my head in amazement when the tower came into view, but otherwise, I held my tongue. We entered the ruin, and Arender stopped me once again, this time to give warning about the dangers that might be within. This danger took on two forms. First, an Ulzima raiding party who had attacked the temple because of a rash of nightmares they'd been experiencing. This led to the second, something the Vermina priests called the miasma, a gas that puts things to sleep. The story was interesting enough, but what I find more interesting is how much detail Arender had about both the gas and its effects. I can't imagine that this knowledge is standard study among the priests of Mara, assuming there even is a course of study to begin with. No, this begins to sound more and more like personal experience. He hasn't admitted to it, but I'm more or less convinced already that Arender knows all of this because he was here. That's going to make this whole thing even more interesting, I think. Everything before this, I could possibly write off as some kind of coincidence. Before, however, we'd gotten even 20 feet further into the temple, he pointed toward a barred window. He was well away from it himself, not able to see down into the chamber that the window overlooked, so him knowing what was down there cannot possibly be a guess. The Skull of Corruption, Vermina's artifact staff, and the source of the nightmares in Dawnstar. No, he has to have known it was here, and that makes his previous affiliation all but certain. The real question is what I do about that now. He has shown no aggression towards me. Indeed, he acts more and more like someone trying to put his past behind him. In short, an apostate believer in Vermina, turned to Mara to try and gain some solace for his own soul. If that's true, then I know what I am likely here to do. The same thing I did for Periite at Bethartam's. Destroy those who have gone their own way, and allow her other worshippers to rise again elsewhere. The truth all came out a few minutes later. A door with a magical barrier across it, and 2 Orzamer who awoke as we approached. A short fight later, and then the explanations happened. The barrier is, according to Arender, impassable, and with his statement, made with far more confidence or knowledge than he should, I finally asked the question. He was a priest of Vermina, and he was here when the Orzamer attacked. He fled, leaving behind everyone else to die, and has spent the last 2 decades trying to find redemption through worship of Mara. I think I can tell him how that is going to turn out for him. He doesn't know me, of course, but if he did, then he'd know that admitting to being a backstabbing traitor would be the worst thing he could do to get me on his side. He intends to find a way past the barrier and destroy the skull. I can't say for certain what Vermina wants yet, but I know what I want. And it won't end well for Arender. We moved on to what he claims was the library for these worshippers, and after killing a pair of Orzamer and a few Verminian priests who didn't take kindly to being awoken, we began our search for a book called The Dream Stride. He claimed at first that it was just a book of alchemical recipes, but after I found it, he gave me more information on its contents. On a side note, continuing to conceal information from me despite there being no reason to do so was not helping me to warm to this myrrh. The potion he wants is called Vermina's Torpor. Supposedly, it will allow someone, me in this case, to travel physical distances while in a dream state. This should, in theory, allow me to bypass the barrier from earlier. Of course, this all assumes it works and that we can find the ingredients we need for it. The next adjacent room was an alchemical lab. The Orzamer raiders had done a job and a half on it. That much was immediately obvious. Those that awoke from slumber as we entered very quickly began sleeping eternally, however, leaving us free to see what was still usable in the wreckage. The answer was not much. There were few ingredients still in usable state, and all but a small number of bottles had been shattered, their contents long since drained out and soaked into the stones of this place. Except, somehow, for a single one that Arender immediately identified as the torpor we were looking for. He gave me what instructions and knowledge he could of how the potion would work, but as he had never used it personally, he had only stories to go from. That was not exactly reassuring. If I am to complete whatever it is I am here to do, however, a moment's hesitation, and I quaffed the contents of the potion. I was out fractions of a moment later. At least I assume I was dreaming, or having a vision, something other than the normal way of seeing the world. I found myself in the central room, 2 Verminian priests discussing the Orzamer attack. The decision to release the miasma was made, and suddenly they were speaking to me, calling me Brother Casimir. My words were not my own, but I heard myself agreeing to do what had to be done, to raise the barrier and release the miasma upon everyone. As the other 2 began their preparations for battle, I set off towards elsewhere in the tower. Like the words I had heard myself speak, I had no control over where my feet took me. I was along for the ride, it seemed, with no control over what I saw, did, or said. Scenes of battle greeted me in every room. The priests, though powerful, were being pushed back by powerful Orzamer warriors. Warhammers, greatswords, and sheer stubbornness were allowing them to push forward through the almost literal storm of lightning and fire that came back at them. I watched warriors fall. I witnessed priests cut down from behind, the stink of death, the spray of blood. The feel of fear in the air was prevalent as my body continued to move through the chaos. Part of me was afraid of what I was seeing, terrified that without control of myself, I would fall in this battle. But tucked into the back of my mind, I noticed a new presence. A small one that kept to herself and seemed to smile with grim determination. "You will not fall here," she said in a near whisper. "You see but a memory of this place, and that memory's owner did not fall that day. Watch and listen." So it proved to be. I moved among the combatants as though a ghost, completely unnoticed and unharmed as I wove through tendrils of flame, spikes of ice, and forks of lightning. None noticed me as I walked by blood-soaked weapons and blood-smeared Orzamer, moving from priest to priest in a deadly dance of death. It was only now that I realized what this other presence, tucked into the back of my mind, was. This made me fear even more than I had when the memory, had begun. There was only one person it could have been. Vermina, the Lord of Nightmares, was in my head with me. Still, I continued moving onwards. Soon, I had reached an area I recognized, the other side of where the barrier had been put up. I watched my own hand reach out and pull on a giant chain, heard the sounds of gas being released into the air around me, the barrier going up. Shortly after, sound began to fade as we fell into dark sleep, but for me, the nightmare was not over. Vermina was still with me. "You have seen the actions. You have seen the betrayal. The moment is not yet ripe for his downfall, but when the moment comes, do not hesitate. Do not pause. Strike down the betrayer, and you will have earned my blessing and my mercy." The blackness took me. Suddenly I could see once more, and I was on the other side of the barrier. Evander stood on the far side, looking somewhere between amazed that it had worked and smug that he had been proven right. The barrier seemed to be powered from a soul gem nearby, and removing it from its receptacle dropped the barrier. I didn't want to waste words on Evander. Vermina had given her orders, and Evander had done nothing to make me want to ignore them. Instead, I waved brusquely for him to follow as I retraced the steps I had taken as Brother Casimir, back towards the heart of the temple. What had to happen would happen there, once we had killed all those who still slumbered here. We entered the final room before the Skull of Corruption, and the two I had seen in the vision stepped out from around the corners. They greeted Evander by name, but not the name he had given me. He was greeted as Casimir, the one whose memory I had lived during the dream stride. I now understood my role fully. I was not the one sent to avenge the betrayal. I was the backup. These two priests, still devout and holding to their beliefs, were the primary. They were to kill Casimir, Evander, the priest of Mara, before he could destroy their lady's artifact staff, thus protecting their lady's interests and avenging themselves of a traitor. I would watch, wait, and see if my services were needed. If they failed, it would fall to me to kill the traitor. Thus, I faded into the background and watched as the three men, once brothers bound by vows, did everything they could to kill each other. In the end, Evander survived, his hands soaked in the blood of the fallen. I took my place by his side as we ascended the steps toward the Skull of Corruption. He began his ritual, granted him by Mara herself, he claimed. I stepped back, walking slowly back down the stairs as I watched and waited. I knew what was coming now. What I had to do, what I had been meant to do from the moment Vermina sent me the dream fragment in my mind last night. The barrier around the skull fell. My bow rose, the point of the bone arrow tip aimed straight for his heart. I waited only for the final order. And then it came. "Now," she said, and my arrow flew from the bow and struck true. "Brother Casimir, priest of Vermina, traitor and betrayer. Belief is not the motivating force in your life, but fear. Your fear led you to become a priest of Vermina, for you could not face the truth in your dreams. Fear led you to leave your brothers behind when the Orzamer attacked, for you were not truly dedicated to Vermina, not ready to do her will as you always claimed. Fear led you to leave Vermina and take up the name Erender, priest of Mara, for you could not face the truth of your actions in Nightcaller Temple. You were a coward who stuck the blade in deep when you felt the need to run once again. Now you too shall feel the bitter bite of betrayal as my arrow pierces your back and stops your fearful heart from ever beating again. You died as you lived. A coward. Erender, priest of Mara, betrayer of Vermina, is dead." I rose to the top of the stand and took hold of the Skull of Corruption. Vermina had not more to say to me. The deed she had summoned me for was done. Her staff would now be protected, her will now complete. If I ever hear her words again, it would be in the depths of sleep, barely understood, and just as easily forgotten. I turned and left Erender's remains for time to deal with. This temple has a knack for hiding itself, and once the nightmares in Dawnstar vanish, I have little doubt no one will think to look here for Erender, and if they do, well, no reason that they would associate his death with me, after all. I took the time on the way out to harvest some of the mer blood that Septimus needed, but otherwise cast no backwards glance towards the traitor on the dais. When I returned to Dawnstar, I found it remarkable how little anyone seemed to notice that Erender was not at the inn that night. Perhaps seeing him leave the inn earlier today had bought him a little time, the illusion that he was taking action to fix their nightmares. In a way, they would have been right, though for all of the wrong reasons. That, however, is not my problem any longer. I went to sleep that night, and my dreams did not trouble me.